Okay, apparently we are live. So, hello everyone. Hi, bonjour, hola, namaste, wanakam to everyone joining from various parts of the world. I am Mudit, your host for the show. I'm a founding member of Skillspace.ai, and we are pretty glad to host you all of you today in this beautiful evening or afternoon wherever you're joining from. To quickly introduce Skillspace AI, it's a platform that is meant for delivering better experiences for end-to-end technical assessments at scale. It helps you hire tech talent through coding assessments, AI challenges, take-home assignments, one-on-one interviews, everything contained in a very extremely simple and lucid manner within a single ecosystem. That is Skillspace AI. We've been fortunate to garner trust from a range of business starting from early stage startups to Fortune 500s. Pretty thankful to some of them, including Cisco, Capgemini, and Alibaba. Uh, we are joined by our guest Nishant Das, who is the global head of talent acquisition at Coinswitch. He's a seasoned technology leader. He used to lead technology hiring at Bank of America around a decade ago or so. After that, he went on to work for a bunch of businesses starting from various scales. He actually positioned various companies as the choice of employers, and this includes brands like Fractal Analytics, Zeta, Flock, Directi, and now he's making a change at Coinswitch, which is India's largest cryptocurrency exchange. Pretty challenging job to do, but he's probably just the right guy to have on the job. So first of all, thanks a lot, Nishant, for joining all of us today. We are super pumped to have you on board.
Hey, thanks a lot, Mudit, and thanks for the kind words and the introduction. Also, thanks for kind of mentioning that I worked with Bankem 10 years back, so implying that I'm old. So, yeah, thank you.
That doesn't seem from the conversation that we've had in the past, though. Like you seem to be someone who is pretty much keen to be up to date with the trends that are upcoming. But yeah, I mean, of all the people, at least I wouldn't call you an old. Maybe seasoned is a good word for it. Old, definitely not. You are someone who's pretty much thriving from that perspective. But
That's
yeah,
fine. I was
uh,
just jesting. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
we're glad to have you here equally. So to get started, the agenda that we kept for the day was key strategies for hiring in tech. The idea is pretty simple. If you look at this particular year, 2021 as a whole, it was an interesting year. In one sense, it was a pretty much a roller coaster ride where we saw a range of developments, starting from sudden transition to hybrid workforce to bullish market towards the developers end. Okay, it became difficult for employers, founders, and talent acquisition professionals to convert a top talent on board for their company. Okay, and as a matter of fact, the CEO of Cognizant recently mentioned that of all years, hiring top talent has been, if I quote Brian, it was something like it is unlike anything we've seen in many many years. That's coming from someone who has been hiring millions of people across decades. So with this, there are technically a lot of things that are happening in the talent acquisition space, and there's a lot of things to discuss along with it, which is where we have Nishant in the first episode of Hiring Diaries with us today. So without any further ado, let's get started with our agenda. So yeah, so the first question that we have picked, so we actually received a lot of questions. We often speak to founders, to talent acquisition professionals, to recruiters, and we get a lot of questions from them. So we have kind of picked a few of them that we found which will be very relevant for the agenda for the day. So I'll be starting off with the first one on that note. So it's like, in today's era, developers are often sitting on a half a dozen would kind of be a lucky position to have. In many cases, developers have more than a dozen offers, even when we're starting to speak with them. Okay, and onboarding talent thus probably needs to be requires an altogether different approach. It's something that maybe most of the recruiters have not come across. So, what are some of the strategies and essentials that you think works for business at different scales in this particular problem statement?
All right. Great. Thanks for that kind of question. I think it is anybody's problem these days. Um, um, and yes, I mean, 2022 is a year where we have seen, this unprecedented change which has happened in the industry, the great resignation, as they call it. Um, I think one is the question is, first of all, the question is fairly broad. So if I had to kind of answer that, we're kind of talking about an entire talent acquisition playbook out here. But I think some of the more important measures in this year has been that. So obviously there has been a tremendous amount of churn which has happened in the industry. It is necessary to understand what has actually happened. I think why has there been a significant kind of a move, the need to kind of move and all of that. I think overall, I mean, I think a lot of us, the entire workforce, especially on the technology side, and pretty much a lot of other industries as well, have in a pandemic area have been kind of working in a situation where overall work hours have kind of significantly extended. It's kind of safe to say that the average number of hours that an individual kind of works on, irrespective of being in technology or not, has kind of significantly kind of increased. And in the name of productivity, so yes, obviously overall workforces have become more productive, but end of the day, people have kind of have reached a point of fatigue. They have felt that there is maybe a certain amount of change would allow them to kind of feel better. I think the only important thing in this kind of a situation is that I don't, as an industry, as a talent acquisition professional, it is necessary to understand what has been key drivers for people in terms of whatever roles that they are part of. What have been some of the key drivers as to why somebody decided to be a developer and what they're kind of doing and stuff like that. I think it has been necessary to kind of even more important in this period to kind of focus on basics. And everything in the linear process is something which is as important as it was at any given point in time. So yes, the opportunities are kind of multiple, but I think there is a larger focus because the number of opportunities have increased, because there's a significant amount of churn. Um, um, in terms of talent acquisition, we will not be able to solve it with volume. So if you, so for example, if you're trying to kind of scale up your teams, and usually in talent acquisition we call it offer acceptance rates and decline ratios and stuff like that. Um, there's only to a point that you can kind of go hacking metrics, and the solution is not going to be with respect to volume. The solution is going to be is to concentrating in each and every core basics. Well, when I say core basics, everything with respect to um, um, few of the reasons, like yeah, you want to hire top talent out there in the industry, but it is we are constantly in the mode to kind of interview and assess people as to why they are right for the organization, but we very rarely try to answer as to why is the organization is the right choice for the individual in their career. And this is a conversation that needs to be had at every stage of conversation. It should be, it is an important theme. It's a different aspect whether it works or doesn't work, but at every stage of the conversation, whether it's a recruiter who's picking up the phone to have that conversation, needs to kind of go beyond screening and need to kind of give a much larger view of what the organization is kind of trying to solve. And we are in a fantastic stage in the industry where um, we are looking at multiple problem statements. We have multiple tech organizations, multiple startups looking at a variety of problem statements, something which was not existing about a few years back, let's say half a decade back. But we pretty much have use cases, businesses around multiple kind of use cases, multiple kind of business problem statements, and it's probably by far also the best time to grow and build. And it's even necessary to kind of bring in those kind of discuss about elements as to what is the larger picture as to what somebody kind of gets becomes a part of. Um, so yeah so um, I think that should be a larger theme. Happy to kind of discuss into some of these intricate details if required, but largely I think that that is a more important aspect If somebody is kind of choosing to work a few years of their life, with an organization, there should be a significant amount of purpose attached to it than just a change. And the more that we define the purpose at every stage of our interaction with an individual, it makes more sense. So irrespective of the fact that it's not going to be necessary that thereon, I mean, it may feel, it may become, it may become like a natural process that you don't need to have 12 offers to choose one. And that's the only way to is to kind of, if you have a great vision and you have a great problem statement, I think it needs to be kind of discussed very well and in detail. And how does the individual fit in that picture? Mudit, I think you may be on mute.
Yes, I was on mute. Yeah, thanks for nudging me for that. So, yeah, so I think this circles back to the very topic of being active in forums where these talent groups are flocking together, because that is when, as you mentioned, probably we as employers, as founders, as recruiters, can go and communicate our vision and mission in a manner where they can, try to start building that sense of purpose and that connection with our company. How much you align with this particular notion? Because this often also links with the idea of partnering with a lot of developer communities, a lot of partner ecosystems, which have a forte among a particular niche, maybe data scientists, maybe developers, or something like that. So yeah, so what do you think? Like, is this something that helps in the overall theme of things, or what's been your experience so far?
So I think the question, just to kind of shorten the question, I think what you believe is that the vision statement and the purpose of the organization largely stays, um, ends up being locked at a founder's level, and how do you translate that across the org? Is that the question?
Across the org and across the ecosystems out there, because if the developers do not know about it, they may not be able to relate to it right when they start talking to your recruiters. So how does that happen?
So I think, again, a very very fundamental change. I think it's not change. It's about first is realization that this is something which is, this is a messaging which needs to be kind of consistent across. Talent acquisition professional obviously need to kind of, at any given point in time, should have a significant understanding of the business that they're into. Um, um, and a large, there is certain amount of responsibility that the founders themselves have in terms of, the right kind of messaging across the organization, in terms of what is the overall, um, what is your north star goal, what is your moonshot goal, what is the organization going to look like in the next 5 years to 10 years, and what are you kind of doing at this point in time. So it kind of gives vision to people as to what they are going to be doing and how is it connected to that goal. Is the is the very natural human aspect of connecting yourself to something bigger. And that's by far the most important aspect. It's a natural need for human beings to be being part of the bigger picture. And if that is the if we know that that is something that is an important aspect, why not have a communication framework which allows you to do it? And it's not very difficult as such. A communication framework could be a team meeting, it could be a town hall, it could be a team huddle, where you're kind of, or it could be inviting few other functions into your team huddles to kind of see what is your, overall, let's say it's a product function, then what is the product function kind of looking at, in the next few months to the year, as such. So that gives a very good picture with respect to, and it is necessary for the individuals who are part of that conversation to pick up important elements in those conversations, and also kind of have conversations around this and make interviews and assessments more contextual in nature, where you're also kind of talking about some of these elements, and it's not just a recruiter's responsibility. It should be shouldered by everybody in the interviewing process, whether it's a developer, senior developer, an architect, or a engineering manager who may be there in the process. I'm talking about largely tech, to kind of, talk about some of the, problem statements that the organization would be kind of taking up, and uh, what's so great about it. Answer that question, in terms of what is the kind of complexity that they are kind of operating at. And give that introduction from early on. I don't think there's an issue in terms of discussing about some of the big bang goals that the organization is pursuing from an engineering standpoint, or from a product standpoint, or from a design principle standpoint. It is necessary to kind of make them part of the process. The other element is that an interviewing process at any given point in time may work or may not work in terms of selection of the individual, but it is necessary to kind of treat the individual as an employee of the organization already, and share information and talk about the overall goals of the organization in detail, and have peer level conversations. And only if you are able to kind of bring in a peer level comfort in your conversations would the other person get comfortable to ask you more questions. A good and any good interviewing process is also kind of a subset of as to how many questions or relevant questions were actually discussed in that conversation. So these are some of the elements which are necessary, and we need to kind of keep in mind is that everybody is a partner in the process, and start treating people as existing employees in terms of, if not all, some of the larger, more important or more complex problem statements that are the organizations facing, and what they could be related with, or what they could be working on.
Okay, makes sense. A very short and quick follow-on question on top of this. When do you think is the right time for a founder to start looking at these first principles? Like when there is a series A or day zero? I mean, is there a definite time in this when they should get started with these things?
First principles thinking has to start from day zero. I don't think there's any alternative to that. I just have that as a short answer.
Okay, okay, makes sense. Thanks for that. I think there are a bunch of questions coming on. I'll pick one of them quickly from Kim Zana. They ask like, what do you suggest as the attraction channels that TA can use to establish connection with tech talents?
Um, I think I think for that, I think we have way too many options right now in the industry. I'm not sure at what level this question is being asked, but as far as channels are concerned, I think right now, while the number of options have increased for employers and employees both, the good thing is that um, there's tremendous acknowledgement for talent acquisition related technology, which is why there are multiple platforms which have been kind of created. I think there are some of the very large ones which are kind of already there. The usual suspects being LinkedIn, etc., and all of that. But there are multiple very focused players. I think uh, I'm happy to kind of have a more focused discussion with the individual who asked this question with respect to some of the channels as to that you can kind of focus on for very specialized talent. So you could have you have multiple places which have acknowledged the fact that there's a need for building the right kind of building on skills or competencies in the org, which is why there are multiple incubation academies which have kind of started. And it's a great thing, and I think it's a lot of them which are kind of getting created. At least they're understanding the problem statement. At least they're trying to solve it at an SD1 level or an early SD2 level. There are multiple academies which are kind of incubating folks for about 3 to 6 months time period to get them industry ready. Or somebody could be working in a services setup and would like to kind of um, would like to have be working in a scenario where you can be a full stack developer with much more complex problem statements that you can kind of solve. So I think the bunch of academies there which are kind of doing that. I'm just saying that this is an acknowledgement of the fact there's multiple tech and platforms being kind of created. Um, and I think this is a point in time where again some of the old frameworks need to kind of also work well. I think um, organizations and employees need to kind of move from a framework from employee referral to probably naming, let's say, five people that you respect and say, tell that to the go back and tell that to your talent acquisition team, these are the five people that I kind of respect, and can you go and fetch them? I mean, let's not worry about rewards, or maybe you can have a rewards framework for that. I mean, that's organization specific. But if you are bringing in the best in talent, the best in breed talent, it makes sense to kind of not put the burden of a referral. So because a referral is usually a qualified application, but if you ask me who are the top five talent acquisition people that I really respect, I will just kind of rattle out like five names very easily, right? But if you ask me to kind of get their profiles, then I have to kind of go through the convincing route and all of that. If you don't have the time and space to kind of do that, I say that, hey, you are the recruiter, these are finance, why don't you kind of go and chase? And maybe I will try to kind of nudge them. That becomes an easier process than going through the whole kind of curve. The only thing is that you don't get the reward for it, or maybe a company can just have a different kind of a reward system for just pointing at one direction. So there are multiple things, and I think you need to kind of look at some of. There are a lot of things which will emerge from your core practices, but the execution method may kind of change. So outreaches are a very important aspect, but um, a very important element of recruiting. I mean, a good recruiting team will always have more than 30% of people will they kind of trying reaching out directly and see if you are able to kind of convert them. You can kind of look at multiple ways of um, running a marketing drip campaign, which is outbound oriented to kind of get the best of people interested. So I'll just throw a metric and I'll leave the rest of it to imagination. Any good sales process for any good sales process to yield a qualified lead needs at least eight interactions, eight online interactions for the person to come up with a response. You don't know whether it's a positive response or a negative response, but the average response rate kind of across the world, this is something that HubSpot shared a couple of years back. The minimum number of interactions that you need is eight. And in one of my previous organizations, we did this experiment. It came up to about four and a half. The number of response rates was lower because it concerns your own individual career, and you don't have to take the burden of decisioning for the organization. You can take a decision for yourself very easily than your organization. So yeah, so all I can say is that if your candidate doesn't respond within the first within your first email, you need to kind of get more innovative with respect to because scientifically it is the overall research says that you need minimum four touch points. So how are you going to make those four touch points more interesting is as a question back to you. So that's a problem statement. I'm just breaking down the problem statement. Solution lies with you.
Yeah, I think you pointed out some very interesting ways to tackle this particular problem. Maybe even thinking it from the principles of persistence, or using technology to kind of stay in touch with these
Correct.
folks out there. And yeah, I think if
There's a third
we just
element, which is creativity, which is also very important because persistence can be misconstrued, and people don't like to be pursued as well. So you need to be creative in that process.
definitely, yeah, yeah. I think we as founding members can vouch for it. We've been very much persistent enough in different ways. It took us some time to get creative, but yeah, okay. Coming, back to the agenda, we have a bunch of questions that are coming in. We'll keep taking them, but I'll probably take a few questions out from the agenda as well.
Sure.
So, this one question that I wanted to ask is like, in this increasing competitive ecosystem, there are a lot of tech hiring solutions which are coming up on today's date. Okay, yeah. So yeah, so there are a lot of solutions that are coming on today's date, and they use different perspectives, different approaches to solving for tech hiring. Assessments platform, however, is one of those traditional tools which still are being leveraged by a range of companies, and technically are leveraged by most of the companies that you've been a part of. Okay, so I wanted to know what's your perspective in terms of these platforms. How do you think they help in the overall scheme of things from a technology hiring standpoint?
Uh, I would call them recruiter's best friend in terms of get some. get some tangible information on a candidate very early on in the process. You actually have something kind of nice and documented, and somebody has gone through the rigor of spent time and solved a problem statement. It could have been it could be a coding problem statement, or it could have been a scenario which would have given a lot of organizations end up giving case studies and all of that. And some of them are more automated in nature, so that you can actually get an objective score out of the assignment and all that. I think it really helps, as long as the problem statement which has been given is relevant to the process and the role being hired for. I think that is the point where, as long as that is being as long as that has been thought through well, and has been made relevant to the process or the role, it makes a lot of sense to kind of do some of those early assessments, which give very tangible results in the process. And it is also necessary, and some of these processes can also be executed very well if you have a robust career framework built within the organization. If it may sound like a heavy word, but if you are able to kind of do this per position as to what is the kind of competency framework that you're looking for a particular position, and you kind of break it down to kind of say, this is something that we can actually check at an early stage. If this is what we are going to check at an early stage, we can break it down and say that our problems need to be kind of designed. So once somebody is answering that, then these are the competencies which you can easily kind of pick up. So I think that element of breakdown partnership has to be, that much of thought process has to be put up to set it up. And once it gets set up, then you need to experiment for a few cases, see how it's kind of going, what is the correlation with respect to your success. And yeah, if there's a direct correlation, then I think it's fantastic, and you need to kind of keep replicating and probably upgrade or change basis needs. So I think they could be fantastic friends to the talent acquisition professionals in the whole process.
That makes sense. I have a quick follow-on question on this. Like a lot of recruiters that we speak to, they have this particular problem statement that when they send out these tests on assessment platforms, the number of people taking them, there's a churn in the process. First of all, sourcing talent on today's date, building a connection itself is difficult. And then, they send out a test and wow, suddenly they're out of the funnel. Now, as a recruiter, as a talent acquisition leader, how can someone, tackle this particular problem statement? And especially on this lines, I'll also pick one particular element that Thai asked in their question is how would you solve this for senior professionals as well? Now, one aspect is like a churn among early career talent, and second is which happens more prominently is for senior professional developers or data scientists. So, how do you think one can tackle this?
These problem statements are so usual, and it just brings an automatic smile, and kind of uh, it's something which kind of keeps happening, and we tackle this day in and day out. I think there is no absolute solution to this. I think one of the things which kind of end up working is that, at least for senior roles, you bring in the assessment in the second stage, and not in the first stage, because you need to have that conversation with the individual as to why, for once at least, it has to kind of come in, um, from someone in the interviewing panel, excluding the recruiter, as to why that assessment is important. Just 2 minutes of conversation as to why we are kind of putting in this assessment, and what is the purpose of it, and also kind of define the problem statement in advance. There's nothing like that as to, we are trying to arrive at this decision on this element. If you are trying to be kind of fair with respect to your interviewing process, there's nothing wrong in being transparent, saying that we are trying to arrive at some of these elements and these competencies. An interviewing process is basically a simulation process, whether you are going to be successful in this role that we are kind of hiring for. And as long as we are able to kind of bring in that confidence, it just takes 2 minutes to kind of bring in the purpose of doing that. There's no need to kind of force fit something like this in the process. As long as something like this can be defined well, I think it should be kind of fine. And then if it doesn't work out, then I think, um, I I mean, you leave it to the function as to how they want to kind of decide their assessments, but largely this is one good way to kind of this is a human process and you need certain amount of human intervention. Can't throw the problem statement as well at all given points in time. I think the other thing is that, and when we're doing very large assessment, typically has high volume assessment, it happens at an early stage. Typically, data analyst or a analyst role or SD1 kind of a role where some of these things kind of come up. I think if it is getting tough to kind of explain everybody verbally, bare minimum recruiter should be kind of explaining the purpose of the assessment rather than saying there is an assessment. It's good to kind of define the purpose of the assessment and what are the parameters that you're kind of trying to arrive at, and share that in advance. If in written form, if you can, then nothing like it. It just gives it always helps to be kind of transparent in the process, and I think you know people who you will end up hiring will value that. So that's all I can say.
Yeah, that makes sense. As we move forward, I just want to point out there are words of praise from Kimson and our old friend Millie from WebEngage. She says it's super practical pointers which can be adopted by companies to strategize hiring. So yeah, thanks to Nishant and thanks to Millie for this comment. So now moving on, one thing that I want to ask on this particular lines is something that you mentioned is one common struggle that I have seen in interactions with a lot of early stage founders is that the struggle in zeroing upon one particular candidate screening technique. Like you mentioned that there can be a case study based approach, there can be an approach based on coding assessments or something like that. And I've seen that a lot of early stage founders struggle in zeroing upon one of them because most of them are evangelized by leaders out there. Now, as a leader, as a TA professional, as a founder, how do I go about choosing one of these for my company? Is it through an hyper experimentation process, or what do you suggest in this particular use case?
In terms of choosing the right platform, is that the question?
Right platform or right approach in terms of, let's say we have zeroed upon a particular platform, and then which type of questions should I have in my assessment? Like, because if you're looking at any of the leading platforms including Skillspace.ai, we give a bunch of ways for companies to assess because we want to give options to our recruiters. We can consult them, but then they themselves are usually confused in terms of the approach that they need to have in terms of creating a test. So what is your opinion for an early stage founder who's tackling this particular problem?
I think so. I mean, this is probably for a founder who's extremely hands-on. Is that is to come with a if there is no bandwidth, there is no don't want to involve too much of time in terms of designing something. The good thing about such platforms is that they have plethora of medium to high complexity problem statements. So at least invest time in terms of going through those problem statements, um, and then have a follow-up conversation as to what was your approach of solving that problem statement. And I think that's a good starting point to kind of see. And every problem statement may end up having, most of the problem statements always have more than a few options of solving it, no more than a few ways of solving it, and it's kind of and in that particular journey, you can kind of measure a bunch of, I mean, evaluate a bunch of things with respect to the kind of algorithm that they kind of chose, or what was the kind of approach. And also kind of collaborate on a different problem statement, a different approach for the same problem statement, and ask for feedback from that individual. It says a lot with respect to how the person is commenting on the other approach, and are they able to kind of pick up elements whether it was a better or worse approach in by breaking it into various checkpoints. So, for example, if you're talking about, hey, I chose this approach, but then my time complexity is going to get hit if I'm choosing that problem statement. Accuracy may be better and stuff like that. So those are the things that you need to kind of once simulate in your mind, and then give probably a medium or a hard problem statement, and then assess the individual on the approach. So that's one good way of, and the founder obviously should have solve the problem themselves also. That's the bare minimum requirement.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I'm very curious to know, like you mentioned, You put that question like how does one zero on a particular platform as well. I'm pretty keen to know what do you think as a talent leader would be the approach to solve this particular problem state.
I think I think some of the parameters, and I think this changes based on the company, and this is the kind of organization that you are in. Largely, sometimes some of these platforms are chosen because of bandwidth issues. Sometimes it's actually the real need to kind of actually, you're still scaling. You have only 4 to 5 members in your team. You will not be able to kind of spend more than, let's say, 25% of your time on recruiting, which is good enough. 25% is great. Anything more than it, you start bleeding on delivery. But if that's the kind of problem statement, then I would want to kind of go with a platform which has a great database of questions to kind of choose from. So if I'm kind of building a platform which is, I'm building a team which is across front end, back end, full stack, databases, data sciences, analytics, and stuff like that. Then what is the kind of database of questions that I'm kind of looking at? And also do a little bit of a random check if these questions are unique questions. How many of them are kind of unique questions? Have they been used by other organizations? How many other organizations have kind of used it and stuff like that? And how quickly are the question is the question pool getting refreshed? Because as you kind of grow, you would like to kind of have some differentiation as such, with respect to problem statement, so that it is inevitable that questions will get repeated across companies, but the frequency should be kind of low. It should not be a question statement or a problem statement which is used by everybody else. um, one of that is a very important parameter. Then other elements with respect to, I think systems have kind of got very unique and amazing right now. I think other elements with respect to, which are basically, I think, sanity check items as to how do they look at plagiarism, and how they are looking at proctoring, as one element. In what format is the report being generated? Does it give a conclusive insight on various parameters? Can you tweak on the evaluation parameters? Can you customize it on your own? So I think some of these elements are kind of and at one point in time, how much can you execute, are some of the important items. I think the I think the more important aspect here is that the ability to kind of customize basis the need of the customer becomes a little bit high, um, uh, because every CTO or a founder is trying to kind of solve it for their org, and every org is unique, and you would want to kind of design something which works for your problem statement in some way. So certain amount of customization helps in choosing the right kind of platform.
Makes sense. I think I couldn't have agreed more on any of these elements, and I think it's very important. Some of the things that you mentioned, which is less commonly shared in public forums, is being cognizant about the fact that these questions need to be looked upon again and again to see if they are already in public forum, because that actually hampers the employee branding as well. It is very common to see top developers cribbing on LinkedIn, saying that this question was repeated or it kind of created an unfair assessment parameter for them. And yeah, it's a very valid point. I couldn't have agreed more to any of these. But yeah. So now moving forward, I just want to ask one thing. Is it's a very important thing that a lot of people talk about is becoming an employer of choice. Okay, now it's something which is easier said than done, way easier said than done. And but the reason I'm asking this to you is because all of the companies that you have worked with, I mean, Bank of America is definitely a global bank. But then if you look at companies like Fractal, when you started working with them, and then you have brands like Zeta, Flock, Directi, and then now you are working with Coinswitch. These all companies have kind of been able to position themselves as a pretty rock solid recruiter. Okay. Now, how do you go about tackling this particular problem statement of building a really strong employer brand against, all of the other companies and becoming the preferred employer out there?
Um, I think again, broad question from you, Mudit. We'll take some time to kind of answer that, but I think some of the things which may have worked, I'm gonna keep global brands aside from this, because global brands come with trillion-dollar market caps, and it's a pretty large game, and it's kind of it's a different thing altogether. And then, but then even in those organizations, there are some very unique traits which actually work for those organizations versus other banks and stuff like that, other investment banks. So, but I think largely I'm just kind of coming to the kind of product kind of organizations or an analytics kind of an organization. Um, you know, um, uh, I think some of them, it constitutes a lot of other employers in the country as well, that they have been able to kind of been able to set up a very unique element as far as the brand is concerned. So for some of the brands, it has been understood um, that you have a well-rounded 360 degree learning process, and you will get to work with some absolutely amazing problem statements. And but at a very early stage in your career, the organization will also kind of invest in you in terms of making you a well-rounded of professionals. So it's not about kind of joining the organization, get trained and leave, but it's you also kind of, or also kind of bringing in the right kind of problem statements across industries, on kind of working some of this very challenging problem statements, and projects. And it's the only thing which kind of interests people, and the messaging around that, and that is something that kind of goes in messaging, in terms of defining the kind of this thing. The other element is that, um, and this is a quote from my previous company CEO Bhavin, is that, um, is like, keep the party. I mean, if you keep your bar really high. I mean, recruiting is like calling people to a party, and you have a significantly high bar as to who becomes a part of that party. And I think that kind of is goes a long way in terms of, and I'm very thankful to him for these kind of overarching philosophies as such, and I think shaped my thought processes as well. So I think, probably you can have the reputation of being, so if you clear the bar of this organization, you have probably really cracked it, and that's the kind of feeling that you kind of go through, and you automatically become want to be a part of that, the party, the organization as such. um, why does this help? Because in your interviewing process, whether you hire or you do not hire, it ends up being a learning process for you. And that's what people are always thankful about, and that they really appreciate about. And if in your minimal interaction with the people, you're able to establish that, that's a differentiating element. There are other things with respect to what organizations do from an employer branding standpoint, but I think at a fundamental philosophical level, these are some very important aspects that need to kind of show in everything that you do, in terms of, not showcasing, but just making it transparent to people that this is how you operate, and people value that. And there is no template. I mean, there is no right or wrong way to do it, but it is to what an organization has, how an organization has differentiated themselves over the years. And then if you know this is your strength, that's what you kind of ensure that you are making it very open, transparent, and talk about it more freely, as such.
To be very honest, I'm kind of blown away with the perspective that you shared, including that quote from Bhavin. He's someone who used to come up with these very interesting quotes, which made all the sense. But yeah, and I think this perspective where you mentioned that it's important to position your company as someone which is a very difficult one to crack and actually act as an advantage, where there comes pumps in this element of virality where people would want to crack it, would want to take away learnings from the interview process and everything. It's a very interesting way to look at it, and one of the rare perspectives that I've heard till date. I think it would have it would have come from none other than you, maybe. But yeah, I think thank you for sharing this. I'll move on to the next question, and it's on the lines of what you mentioned. So we're seeing an influx of top tech companies coming to India. Last year, this particular year, 2021, we saw the Googles and the Amazons hiring left, right, and center, hiring super aggressively. We also saw Coinbase, which is pretty much a global competitor to Coinswitch, step into the Indian ecosystem. Now, Coinswitch is someone who has been going after a very good talent, and I've seen them also getting successful at it. But then, what do you think is an advice to the talent leaders of India Inc. for tackling this? How does a top tech recruiter compete against the fangs of the world?
Okay. So before I venture into that answer, I would want to kind of quote my existing CEO, CEO of Coinswitch, Ashish Singhal, that is very clearly said is that the way we are kind of paving the path in the Web 3.0 space, we're pretty much writing we're trying to kind of build a framework for the next 2 decades in the country as such, and he says this with vehemence and from an absolute point of confidence that the next Google and Facebook will emerge from India. Um, 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 uh, I mean, within our country as such. So yeah, so I don't think that we are at a stage where we need to kind of I mean, I think they are fabulous organizations. The overall the FANG list that you kind of mentioned, but I think the most there will be larger players at any given point in time. I think it's always about your own unique proposition that you kind of bring in, and it is absolutely necessary to kind of bring in that unique proposition about the organization and propagate that in messaging. You can't say it once, you can't say it twice. You have to keep on repeating it in multiple different ways. The flavor stays the same, and you kind of keep iterating on as to how you are kind of communicating the message and in terms of the vision of the organization. I think it's absolutely necessary, and um, whoever feels um, whoever feels convinced enough is will definitely kind of choose an opportunity with the organization. But at any cost, messaging cannot stop. Messaging in any way and form to kind of convey the goal statement and vision statement of the organization. I think, and again, I'll come back to my previous point, which is said defining, answering the question, why should that individual join the company, rather than the other way around in evaluation processes. As long as that question is being answered, the right kind of messaging is all will always emerge.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think on this note, I think one thing that I want to point out is I've often seen that in various points that you mentioned, you've often been relating the tech recruiting space closely with the, let's say, marketing or sales function, where it's all about kind of getting the employer value proposition right, choosing the right channels, choosing the right tools to put it across, and then then going forward with it. I think this approach is also something which is very important. Is probably you would agree with, I guess. It's important for recruiters to understand that it's a two-way street and not a one-way street, where they're just talking to people and getting them on board.
Right.
Yep. So yeah, moving forward, is the next question that I'll pick is yeah, this one. So we see that a lot of companies would want to deliver a very strong and good candidate experience. It's one of the things that have been trending lately in the TA space. Okay, like everybody wants to get that personal touch, give a very memorable experience. But now the term memorable in itself is very subjective in nature. What may be a good experience as per me might not be good for the talent out there. So uh, how do we see it from a common lens? How do we solve this, where we kind of set a particular approach to kind of get the candidate experience right in hiring or screening talent?
So I think again it's very orient. The question is very oriented with respect to what's the human experience like in some kind of an interaction. I think um, um, a human inter. So first of all, candidate experience, I must say, is that I hope whoever is talking about candidate experience knows that it's a measurable process now, and is measuring that along the way. through various tools like candidate NPS in their own process. And first thing is that to kind of understand, make sure that you are actually baselining your process. You're measuring your candidate experience. You are baselining your experience. You are comparing it with some of the best employers in the world. uh, do not compare yourselves just to your own industry or your own city or your whatever. Compare it with some of the best employers at a global scale as to what some of the best NPS scores are, and then choose to do what you're doing, and then read your NPS, segment your NPS, just like any analytics team breaks down customer data to kind of understand the customer life cycle as to what worked in a customer life cycle, how useful was it, and where do you need to kind of change or bring about changes in your whatever. It could be anything related to kind of pricing, packaging, supply chain, anything whatsoever, or just a retail experience. So it could be anything. In a similar way, in the candidate journey, what worked, what did not work is can be deep dived and can be understood as to what's going well for you. Understand that first, and make sure that you're taking it to the next level because you're already doing that right. Um, and then immediately kind of fix elements which are coming for from a measurement process like that. It is necessary to as to how you design that first to understand what is exactly happening. What I spoke about is a more reactive approach. A more proactive approach is to kind of ensure is and both have to happen in tandem. It's not either or. Largely an element which I kind of spoke about is that um, um, would be largely with respect to what was the learning experience of the individual in the process. How challenging did we make it for the individual in the process? What was the interaction like? Whether it's a recruiter's interaction or an interviewer's interaction, will the person, the intent should be to kind of you know make it a fabulous experience, but an important element will be learning in that process altogether. From a recruiter standpoint, everything that promotes the culture of transparency and proactiveness kind of gives, I mean, from a candidate's perspective, that's a great experience. If I think it's always around timelines, and it's invariably about timelines or responses. It is invariably about being transparent as to what are you, how well are you explaining the process, and how well prepped are you before a process kind of happens. I think we should never have interviewing processes as a rule when somebody is kind of surprised as to what is the kind of conversation they are entering into. Especially for SME roles, leadership it's fine, but especially for SME roles, it is kind of necessary to kind of understand what is the kind of framework, what is the outcome that you're looking at, and it kind of always makes sense to kind of say that in advance. Is that what is the kind of one? I'm going to go through an LLD round, I'm going through an HLD round, I'm going through a problem solving round, or it's a technology deep dive. So if you're saying technology deep dive, what are your preferences? So some organizations have their preferences and they want to do deep dive accordingly, and some organizations, which is a better way, is focus on strengths of an individual. They don't kind of go into any area that the candidate doesn't go know of. So they just focused on strengths of the individual and they build that up, and they take challenge them to a level to understand what is their ceiling. And when they take their ceiling, then they are pushed to that ceiling as to, can you solve this or can you give an answer to this? That's when they kind of feel challenged, and that's when the awe comes in for the organization, and the need to kind of join that organization, need to work with those individuals kind of comes in. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's
I
that.
think Yeah, I think that's a pretty elaborate and an important explanation for a lot of people who are looking to understand more about candidate experience. I'll quickly pick one question before we pick the last question for the day because I don't want it to get ignored. It's from Aditi. I'm not sure if it's exactly relevant to the agenda, so if you could quickly answer it. I think she's asking, in today's very challenging market, what are the basic expectations of IT hiring partners or vendors?
I'm as- I'm assuming this is regarding
Seems to be
agencies.
around. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
think it's regarding agencies who partner with recruiting team. I think um, I'm assuming if Aditi has asked this question, Aditi is from either a IT staffing company or a staffing partner in some way. Um, I'll just give a short answer. So one is the pitch which allows opens the door and the with the client, and the other one is you stick to the client. I think something which will open the door is that whether you have solved similar problem statements for other employers who could be competing recruiters. So if you are an employer X and YZ are your competitors, do you seem like someone who has worked with YZ? I think you need to. There will be points in time that you need to kind of start. So you will need a good company to kind of start off with, so that you can share those credentials later that you have worked with Y and Z. But some of those elements kind of come into play. I think but more important element is obviously to kind of how the kind of delivery works, because one important point which I would like to kind of share is that recruiting teams do not like working with multiple agencies for a similar kind of a mandate, unless it's a very large company and looking at numbers in absolute thousands. So you have a proper, you have a vendor governance team which is kind of has a very long list of parameters as to what works and what doesn't work. But largely, it should be similar problem statements which have been solved in the industry. Have you worked on similar assignments? And what is how much do you promise and how much do you deliver? Which means, as far as metrics in terms of closures and acceptance rates, you should be comparable to the core recruiting team, as a bare minimum, not lesser, in terms of some of the recruiting metrics. So as long as you're able to kind of, and the core metrics are usually around fill rate, and SLAs, and acceptance rate. So that's just a simple answer there.
Yeah, thanks. And I think towards the end, you also, thanks for mentioning a few metrics to go about it. This also kind of answers the question that Peter asked very recently is, what's your take on outsourcing solutions? I think summarizing what Nishant mentioned is basically if it benchmark it against the internal hiring process, and if it is performing at least to that level, it makes sense to have them on board if I'm getting it correctly. And yeah, looking at the experience and a bunch of other things. This recording will be available with you, so you can maybe rewind and have a look at it. Now we'll pick the last question as we have less than 2.5 minutes left. So yeah, there's a word of praise from Kim Sana. Thank you very much. So I think I'll move to the last question. So it's basically like this year is almost over. Okay, we are heading towards 2022. What do you think are some of the trends that the talent leaders of the leading companies in India are bracing for? What are some of the things that if let's say I'm a thriving recruiter in the space that I should be aware of or should upskill myself on?
I think um, um, I'm not going to be saying anything new here, but I think this is something that a lot of I've myself heard a lot of leaders speak about, and I'm just gonna relay that again. Is that I think an important piece is going to be storyboarding or storytelling with respect to your brand or your organization that you kind of stand for. What is the big picture? What is the road ahead, and how does the future look? Are going to be some important statements that you need to kind of make sure goes out in messaging. So I think that is the by far the most important thing, which is going to be differentiating as to how talent acquisition teams become more effective. From a candidate's standpoint, I think, in terms of people who want to kind of move roles right now, I think I'm hoping that I have no prediction. I'm hoping 2022 is a year where people who decide to move um, um, choose an opportunity within a minimal set of options and not a dozen offers like Mudit mentioned. Until I joined this conversation, I used to think it was around half a dozen. Mudit has scared me enough by saying that it's actually a dozen offers. Maybe those are the offers that they don't talk about, but I'm hoping the messaging is kind of great enough in the market for people to choose within minimal set of options. It's just more efficient on everybody's time, individuals and organizations as well. So, you know,
Okay,
and you don't
I
have to
think
go through the entire interview process to kind of know more about the company. So you should have enough information to kind of decide that, and organizations should enable it. That's what I meant.
okay, I think that makes all the sense. Storytelling, having the messaging right, and being out there before you start talking to the prospective employee are some of the last things that you mentioned towards the end of the session. I think this was a pretty interesting interaction. Before I thank you for this, I think there are a lot of people who have benefited from this, who have shared their words of praise. So thanks a lot, Nishant. We are absolutely superbly thankful to you for being with us today. I think this was a very important session for all the attendees and for us as well. I personally learned a lot from a founding member's perspective. But yeah, thank you so much, Nishant, for sparing time with us, sparing time for us on a Wednesday evening.
Thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you and answering the questions. Just a shout out, I saw a few messages from ex team members as well. I'm very glad that you still are able to tolerate me, and thanks for kind of joining in. And thanks everyone. It was a pleasure to be part of this session.
Yeah, yeah, right. Thank you. And we also had a message from Swarnendu, which we probably missed to, highlight. Yeah. But yeah, okay. Thank you, everyone. And just one last thing that I want to mention is we promise that we'll be giving away Skillspace.ai credits worth $200 to the attendees as a way of giving back. So you'll be receiving them over email, and you can sign up on the platform before the end of this week to avail the same. I think, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nishant. Have a good evening, good day
Thanks,
ahead.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have a good evening. Thank you. Thanks everyone.